G'day, I'm Mick, and this week we'll be talking about a fan favourite, the fairy dragon. If you haven't heard of them, they're perpetually chipper, tiny dragons sporting wings more befitting a butterfly than their larger cousins. You can tell their age by their colour, which shifts every decade or so, and their gender by the gold or silver tint granted by sunlight. That is, if you can see them, as they're usually invisible, preparing a prank for some unwary innocent about to cross their path. And while their mischievous manner is their defining characteristic, they're not evil or looking to cause harm. Instead, think of them as playful children. They'll ignore any form of authority and just look to have fun. They're not trying to hurt anyone. But because of this, their inclusion in most campaigns is limited to a single encounter or a running joke NPC where the playfulness is dialed up to 11, maybe even to the point of being irritating to the players, and that's it. That's the core concept, the foundation of their interaction. Which is fine, especially if your players enjoy it, but to me, the fairy dragons can be so much more. These creatures are intelligent and often live in forests alongside sprites and pixies, fae in other words. And anyone who's touched on fae in their campaign know things can get weird and unorthodox to say the least. So let's have a go at making fairy dragons more than just that dragon that tripped the rogue last session. For starters, yes, fairy dragons are fond of pranks, but a fairy dragon's idea of a prank isn't necessarily the same as other species. They're dragons, maybe from the Feywild, maybe even able to cross between fae and material at will in your setting. Their concept of reality would be vastly different to our own, equally so their sense of humour. So rather than tripping players or convincing them to fall into a hole covered by hallucinatory terrain, maybe they twist the magical ore around the paladin, causing her to reek of fiend, something sure to grab her attention and lead to confusion, followed by giggling from an invisible dragon. Perhaps they recolor the party member closest in age to themselves to have the same shade they do. No laughing this time, it makes the dragon feel more comfortable with the group, and it follows them, sticking close to that player, observing their personalities and deciding whether or not to reveal itself. They could double the size of a halfling's footprints, swap the hair colours of two players, make one of them smell noticeably of fresh apple pie. Or maybe they don't target the players at all, they just invert the faces on all the silver coins in their possession. Another angle could be if magic is cast in their presence, they may twist it, altering its properties. A fireball bursts into leaves upon impact, dealing force damage and leaving no burns. If you're worried about the mechanics of this, DCs and so on, it's playful fairy dragon magic. Maybe there is no DC as the players have no way of defending against it. If that doesn't sit well with you, it might be an illusion. The players don't notice at first, but when they do, you can let them roll intelligence to just see through it. If you like the sound of that but need wider inspiration for your own ideas, originally fairy dragon spells could be based in either druidism or the arcane. So take your pick of the wizard or druid spell list and have a read. The only clause was they would never learn an overtly offensive or defensive spell. And even those examples I gave may be a bit too obvious and mundane for these creatures. They may be hugely entertained simply by protecting a single player from scrying magic or something equally obscure. So we've challenged the nature of their pranks, but they're still pranksters, still a bit of a one-off character. Well, step 2, don't make the fairy dragon all about the pranks. The pranks should be happening, but the players probably won't notice their earlobes growing mid-conversation. What do we make them about then? Make them like any other character. They're intelligent and by default can speak 2 languages, so they may appear as a forest guide. Maybe the party's been sent to track them down. Perhaps the entrance to a cave the party is seeking is hidden in the middle of a fairy dragon community. If that's the case, bring a lot of treats. They do have dragon blood after all, so greed is a way of life for the fairy dragon. However, their punchline is sweets, candies, and the odd bauble rather than hordes of treasure. You could go the complete opposite direction. Maybe they're not a free species in your setting. They're kept as pets or slaves to those that acknowledge their sentience. The point I guess I keep dancing around here is don't make the characters a caricature of one defining characteristic. A characteristic character caricature. Yeah, don't do that. I said pet, so I should briefly mention the possibility of a fairy dragon companion or familiar. Much like their cousins, the pseudo-dragon, their loyalty is dependent on being well treated and well fed by good company. If they're mistreated even once, that may be enough for the fairy dragon to decide to leave and never be seen again. When fitting a fairy dragon into your setting, we're lucky in that they're one of the creatures that aren't unique to D&D. They may originate in D&D, but other games, other narratives have taken the idea of a fairy dragon and run with it in a slightly different direction to Wizards of the Coast. And this is great for generating ideas as a DM. The Warcraft version of the fairy dragon is flat out immune to magic, able to turn spells used against them into fuel for their own. They're able to shift between the material plane and Feywild, in Warcraft called the Emerald Dream, at will. Also, the beating of their wings clouds the air with magical dust that can be brewed into an ointment capable of invigorating natural creatures, and the fairy dragons themselves have connotations of purity. In one instance, they perform a musical ritual to cleanse the forest inhabitants of their corruption. In Heroes of the Storm, which borrows from the Warcraft universe, just being near a fairy dragon is enough to be healed. So if we're looking for an encounter other than the standard forest affair, a fairy dragon rather than and a cleric may be the healer for a small village, the inhabitants of which pay a regular tribute as a thank you and to keep her around. As always, you can spice up another NPC rather than introducing the fairy dragons directly. An exotically dressed mercenary who stands fast as a fireball roars towards him, maybe wearing armor assembled from a fairy dragon's hide that retains the creature's magical resistance. Or if you want a quest that points you straight at the little tricksters, a noble silver-haired bride is struck down by illness and the players are sent on after the rumour of a butterfly whose wing beats cure all ails. Bit of a thorny prospect, as the players may attempt to murder and de-wing what is at heart a good creature, unless they're wise enough to investigate the nature of the wing beats and barter a deal for some powder. When you inevitably end up running a fairy dragon, remember its nature, especially if you fall into combat. It doesn't want violence. It will first try to confuse or delay attackers with its breath, and then flee. If aggressively pursued, it will use any spell at its disposal to try and misdirect its pursuers into a more dangerous foe or even a sudden drop. Its abilities in the monster manual are quite limited because of this passive demeanor, so try to think of some creative uses for the few illusory spells it does have and get it away safely. Make it appear that one player is being dominated, maybe a crown of madness, and is charging at the weakest member of the group, when really that player was polymorphed into a fly and what they're seeing is an illusion charging them, all to distract from the fairy dragon's escape. If the players start landing blows before you can do anything, maybe use that Warcraft ability to absorb spell energy. If your players are veterans to the game and think they know what to expect out of a fairy dragon, that will be sure to raise some eyebrows. But more than any other creature that comes to mind, the fairy dragons are a license to get creative and have fun with the illusions. They're not looking to straight up murder the party, hopefully, so balance and action economy shouldn't be your primary concern. Get creative, combined spells, concoct new illusions, and come up with slightly weird off-kilter pranks to make your fairy dragons memorable as something fun and different, and not just another slapstick stereotype. And that's my rundown of the fairy dragon. I wonder how many of you actually fallen afoul of them in 5th edition. And are there any underused creatures you'd like to see me highlight? As always, if you like the channel, consider subscribing. There are new videos every week. You can check out my previous creature video on the Thry Crane. But either way, until next time, I'll see you guys down there in the comments.